All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to tonight's program on behalf of the Henry Sheldon Museum of Vermont History in Middlebury, Vermont. My name is Ellery Foutch, and I'm an associate professor in the American Studies program at Middlebury College, where I teach classes on the art and material culture of the United States and critical museum studies. And I am so excited to be here this evening with you to talk about women in the archives with a distinguished group of artists and archivists as my co-panelists. Before I begin, I wanted to give a little bit of background about the exhibit we're here to talk about this evening, which really is the brainchild of a number of important and thoughtful and hardworking women of the archives as well. This exhibition and its coordinated programming is the brainchild of Stewart-Swift Research Center archivist Eva Garcelon-Hart and collections associate Taylor Rostini, who were really thinking together about how to celebrate, honor, and mark the 50th anniversary of the Stewart-Swift Research Center of the Henry Sheldon Museum. And they came upon the idea of drawing what would be ways to make these archival collections, these rich resources that have been so treasured and utilized by researchers and the public and scholars, what could help bring these to life to contemporary artists? The Stewart-Swift Research Center has been supported and powered by the labor and intellect of a lot of hardworking women, including its primary benefactor, Jessica Stewart-Swift, early archivist Polly Darnell, who did groundbreaking research on the history of women in Vermont using the Stewart-Swift Research Center archives, and of course, Eva and Taylor themselves. And they reached out to Rick Cassini-Cador of the KOLAJ Institute. And Taylor, Eva, and Rick worked together to think about ways in which contemporary collage artists might be inspired by and create new works using the materials from the Stewart-Swift Research Center. And don't worry, no archival materials were harmed in the making of this project. They were working from digital scans and doing a lot of high-res scans. And this is culminated in an exhibit that's still on view until January 8th in the galleries of the Henry Sheldon Museum here in Middlebury, Artists in the Archives, Community, History, and Collage, and also this terrific book with essays by Rick Cassini-Cador and images of all of the collages produced in conjunction with the exhibit. So I'm joined by some of the artists who contributed to this fantastic exhibition this evening. And I'll do a brief introduction of all of them. Then we'll have a kind of lightning round of popping through with each of them discussing a little bit of their work. And then we'll open into a longer conversation between I've lost count of how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, between the 7 of us, I think that's right, and all of you who are here tonight, 42 I see populating the room right now. So let's get started. Artist Alexa Frangos will start us off. She joins us from Chicago. She studied visual communications and photography at Washington University in St. Louis before receiving her MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She also comes to us with a long career having studied and practiced law before devoting herself to her art practice full-time. Also in Chicago, Elaine Luther is an independent studio artist who's been an advisory board member for Woman Made Gallery, an ambassador for the Self-Employment in the Arts Conference, and president of the board of the Chicago Metal Arts Guild. Xtine Burrow is originally from Albany, New York, and is now a professor and area head of design and creative practice in the School of Arts, Technology, and Emerging Communication at the University of Texas at Dallas, where she directs Lab Synth E, I hope I'm saying that right, a laboratory for synthetic and electronic poetry. Vicki Scheele is self-taught and has been practicing collage for over 15 years. She joins us this evening from Costa Mesa, California. Artist Nancy Bernardo is a practicing artist and graphic designer who currently teaches at the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York. And last but not least, we have Bernadette Birzer joining us. She is an archivist for collection management and digital initiatives at Newcomb Institute in New Orleans. Her professional interests include the digitization, preservation, and sustainability of both digital and physical collections, extensive processing techniques, archive space, reparative and inclusive descriptions in descriptive metadata, decolonizing libraries and archives, and disaster preparedness, which unfortunately becomes more and more important and crucial every day. Her personal research interests include historic preservation through a feminist lens, creating art, exploring gender and sexuality in American pop culture, breaking down colonial residues, and thinking about how archivists can be activists. So I'm so delighted to have you all here with us tonight, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that Alexa can take the helm. Thank you so much.
All right, I will share my screen and share my piece. I wanted to say first off that it was such a pleasure to be able to just work with these archival materials and try to quickly, it felt like a quick project, but to sort of come up with something that would really highlight, in my case, and I think the other artists here today, the stories of women within these archives. So give me a minute. I'm going to open up my piece, but you can probably see from what I'm sharing already that what I did was I actually limited myself to the use of the letters of that were in the archives of two women, the Ford sisters. They were young women who worked in the textile mills in and the letters that are in the archive were from sort of the mid 19th century. And they were sort of this first wave, part of this first wave of Yankee farm girls who sort of were looking for something. Oops, I got to stop the share. Sorry. I don't want that, but that's one of the letters I looked at. Specifically, I'm sorry, I didn't want the slideshow to go as it is. Let me see if I can, sorry, technical difficulties. Usually when I say the slideshow, it doesn't actually play fully. I can pause it. Okay, hopefully, there, got it. In really looking at the letters, these were, two girls who left their farm life in Vermont, sort of the toil of farm life, and were looking for new opportunities. Now, this first wave of women who came to work in the textile mills, these Yankee farm girls, essentially, this was actually kind of an exciting opportunity, I think, for a lot of them. They lived in boarding houses, and it sort of saved them from sort of the drudgery and isolation of farm life. But what I wanted to do with this piece was connect, because the history of the workers in the mills, of course, got enlarged, and the conditions in the mills worsened and the wages worsened. So later on, we had a lot of immigrants and a lot of child labor working the mills. And so I wanted to sort of connect to that larger community of mill workers later on. And so what I did was I limited myself to just using the letters and the images from the letters, because I sort of like to set crazy limitations for myself, and use the words in the letters, primarily the ones by, I think it was Rebecca, the one sister, writing home about sort of her life working in the mills. And I tried to connect these silhouettes. The main one in the center would be sort of representative of sort of Rebecca and Caroline, the two sisters whose letters I looked at. And the words surrounding it are also just sort of words I pulled from the letters. I don't know if you can read it, but it says the factory in haste, regular wages, sure work for eternity. And to connect it through this thread to a silhouette of a child worker from a Lewis Hine photograph closer to the turn of the century. Yeah, and I wanted to also highlight sort of the handwork. I think the women in the mills did more sort of the delicate handwork in terms of the spinning of the thread. I guess the men were sort of did more of the heavy lifting. So I wanted to use the thread, and I sort of had this old carding, I guess it's called a carding comb, just in my collection, that even though I don't think they would have necessarily been using these in the factory, it sort of to me was representative of that hand labor in terms of taking wool and sort of making it into thread. So that was my thought process with this piece anyway.
Alexa, this is wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm still having technical difficulties. Thank you. And it was very interesting just to read through the letters of these two sisters. I have to say, Rebecca's handwriting was more legible than Caroline's, but just to talk about, they wrote a lot about all the illnesses, and sort of death was sort of looming large. But I do think that their lives were a little bit more exciting than they had been on the farm, but there certainly was a lot of homesickness reflected in the letters as well. And just my work, generally, one of the things I focus on my work is displacement and economic displacement and immigration. So I sort of came to this issue because of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I found really powerful about so many of these collages is how timely the issues raised by the historical archival materials can be. So let's see, I think, should we blitz to Elaine Luther and then we'll come back?
Well, yeah, let me stop sharing. Sorry.
Great.
Okay, so I did multiple collages. So this is not the final one that's in the book, but I like the way the sperm is swimming up to try to attack the ideal wife. So you can see Lydia Pinkham with her Henry Sheldon Museum stamp on her, and she was the most shown woman in America, because newspapers, whenever, hang on, I have to close the screen that's distracting me. Newspapers, when they didn't have a picture of a woman, like even for an obituary, they just use Lydia Pinkham's picture. So, which makes it really hard for people apparently to research other people, because it's like, well, we know that's not her. So I wanted something connected to medicine, and I'm really interested in reproductive rights, and I wanted to cover something about that. And I think a lot of people don't realize how early birth control is. And, Victorian families got smaller. There were reasons for that, people don't realize that. They're like, oh, it was just an economic choice, right? And technology. So that's why I chose Lydia Pinkham. And she made a patent medicine called Mrs. Pinkham's vegetable formula. It was herbs, but vegetables sounded healthier. And so when I heard patent medicine, I thought charlatan, fake, right? But then I researched more and I was like, oh, sorry, Lydia, I was wrong about you, because it actually worked. And primarily their customers were working class women. And the hospitals, all the charity hospitals stopped being charity hospitals and they closed, and then medicine became this for-profit thing. And the working class women had nowhere to go, and for any gynecological issues, the choices were really dangerous surgery where you might die, just say goodbye to the family, or suffer. And so this product actually helped with cramps and with menopause. And so the black cohosh, which is the large plant there, and that digital image was given to me by a friend in the group, which was really cool. So bringing things in from all over. So in my research and my rabbit hole for this, I read somebody's thesis paper. So I know when people write their thesis and they put it up online, they're like, nobody's ever going to read this. No, I might read it. So I read a paper called A Parade of Grateful Women by Laura Commons. And she talked about how it really worked. And we know that because there were repeat customers and they wouldn't have kept buying it if it didn't help. And people still use black cohosh today. So let's see. Okay. One of the other really interesting things about, okay, I'm going to switch to the other collage. Okay. Do you have the one with the pelvis now? Okay. So now you should see the second one. Okay. So one of the other really interesting things about her company is that they published a booklet that explained women's bodies to them, including the reproductive system and how it worked. And they managed to do this during the Comstock laws, right? Where it's illegal to send information about birth control or sex through the mail at all. But they had such an image and they were so careful with the wording, but it had drawings and diagrams in it. They got away with it. And then they had this wholesome image, and the booklets were called like how to do nursing care for the sick children in your family. And then, you know, it's like that internet joke of like, we're going to talk about makeup. Okay, the guys are gone. Let's start the revolution. It's like that. And it's just, these booklets are fascinating and you can read them online because they'll go, it'll be like household tip. Here's how to make a good broth, and then an ad. So one of the things I wanted to find in the research was that they also made birth control. So their Pinkham's vegetable compound, they said it's going to make you so healthy that there's a baby in every bottle. But then ironically, they're also selling this product that you can see, the Female Trouble Sanative Wash. So then I had to connect the dots. So I read a book called, let me get the name of it. I think it's Desires and Devices, or the other way around, about the history of birth control in America. And they explain that that douches were used as a method of birth control, and that the word germ equaled sperm. So I looked on eBay and found actual packaging from the Pinkham company, and it says, a modern antiseptic, germicide, deodorant for vaginal douches, soothing, cleansing, refreshing, promotes healing, non-irritating, non-caustic. But of course, the whole point is to be caustic. And everyone knows, in Desires and Devices, she says, everybody knows germ means sperm. And we know that sperm does not like acidic environments. And the ingredients include boric acid and lots of other harsh stuff. So my collage is this poor, sick, sad woman reaching desperately towards the sanative wash and the birth control. And I made it kind of blue because I'm doing a process a lot in my other art that looks like cyanotype, but is actually a different kind of dye. So I mostly work analog, and originally I thought I might, do it really hard and old school, and then I surprised myself and did the whole thing digitally. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, one of the things I find really invigorating about this exhibit and this group of artists are the very many different media that so many of you work with. So I'm really excited for us to talk more about that and hear more about that. So I'll hand the mic over to xtine now.
Hi, I'll share my screen. And I'll make my screen full screen. My collage is a portrait of Emma Willard. And I have a kind of a personal history with Emma Willard. I come from upstate New York. I was born in Albany, but I lived the first 11 years in Troy, New York. And when I was in middle school, I went to I didn't go to Emma Willard for school, but I did go there for Girls' Summer. And so this is actually their homepage now. Many years later, I was there for Girls' Summer in the 1980s. But I could have been one of those kids. that's pictured there today. And when I first started looking through the archive materials, of course, I came across the material, a lot of materials that tell the history of Emma Willard and of her working in Middlebury before she founded the Emma Willard School in Troy, New York. So I kind of gravitated towards that with the personal connection. And as I was working on my collage, I realized, and I really hadn't put this together until like, kind of diving into this. But I realized that when I was at Emma Willard Girls Summer, the summer camp, and that was about the 6th grade or so, I think that might have been the first place where I felt a sense of creative freedom in my life. And I didn't think I would be an artist when I was in middle school or even in high school. Or even in college at first. I ended up transferring to art school. So I started as a math major. I didn't think I would end up doing art residencies and things like, or teaching art. But when I think back about where some of those kind of, key moments were where I felt a sense of creative freedom, where I felt like it would be okay to be an artist. This place actually was one of those places, Emma Willard, on the campus of Emma Willard. So the materials that I used were in reference to Emma Willard. Of course, I used one of the portraits of her that I wanted to kind of have as like a base in my collage. I wanted her face and her eyes to be there and to be legible. But I also wanted to tell some of her story. I wanted to show her for the kind of the pioneer that she was. And then I also wanted to bring in some personal elements as well. So one of the documents and she wrote a lot, so I didn't read everything, but one of the documents she wrote in 1818 is called A Plan for Female Education. And I was going through that. And as I was going through it as a PDF, I was making notes. And at some point I thought, oh, I wanted to bring my notes. And so you can kind of see my PDF like note taking there. And I wanted to bring those into the collage that I might be in conversation with Emma Willard as the artist kind of making this portrait today in 2022. So that's one of the kind of pieces. I didn't want to have a heavy hand on that so much, but it is there kind of in the background. Also included a couple of maps. Emma Willard was known for bringing science and map making to the female classroom in the sort of, early 1820s, and that's that time of the Victorian era. And that was pretty radical. I myself am an artist who uses technology in my works. And so being someone who feels pretty friendly towards the merger of art and science, or art and engineering, or, from converting STEM to STEAM, I feel a kind of kinship to Emma Willard's, sort of pioneering efforts with science in the female classroom. And then I did use cyanotype, so it's a good follow-up to Elaine. I use cyanotype in my work sporadically. One of my backgrounds is in photography and in alternative image making. So I pulled some begonias and pansies from my garden and created some cyanotypes with those that I also worked into the collage. And I referenced a Victorian flower dictionary. There were floral dictionaries that were published in that. In this case, this one came from the 1840s. And from this particular dictionary, the pansy was thought to represent thoughtfulness, and the begonias were a warning. And I thought that a sort of the thoughtfulness that Emma Willard brought to the classroom, but also this sort of warning to the patriarchy that, like, here we come, seemed to me to be kind of right on. So those are the materials that I used, and some from the archive, some from my house, some from my note-taking. And then I worked, I did work with Sanotype, but I also worked digitally, and the final product is the sort of result of this kind of hybrid approach to image making. I also made a transfer print, so taking the ink and transferring it onto paper, that kind of gave it that atmospheric quality in the background as well. So thanks.
Xtine, thank you. This is so exciting. It makes me think too about the kind of etymology of the digital in the tactile, and thinking about the digital and the artist's hand, as well as the kind of bits and bytes of the digital process. So
yeah, I think about that a lot, that sense of like an original gesture and then a reproducible one, where those boundaries are.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Let's see, we'll pass the microphone now to Vicki. I think we might need to unmute Vicki just a second.
Hi, I am hoping that you're going to share the image that you have of my work, because I did not come prepared, being a total troglodyte when it comes to
No, you're
technology.
wonderful. Unfortunately, I didn't have the digital file, so I'm going to be the really annoying person who holds up.
Okay, this is
Beautiful
great.
book. Speaking
It
of the
is-
digital and the analog.
This is a surprise to me, what I came up with. I had very limited knowledge of archives, or experience, not knowledge, but experience with archives. And I used them in school when I had to, but I wasn't really very thoughtful about it. And having this opportunity to really delve into the archives under the guidance of such marvelous archivists was a pleasure. I came to the project thinking I knew what I was going to do. And within the first week, my head was swimming. I felt like I was standing on a mountaintop, and all of a sudden I had this immense view, and I was overwhelmed. And I went in 14 different directions, but ultimately I was impressed with the women who were in and not in the archives, but really most touched and moved by the archivists themselves who helped us in this project. And that's what my work, thank you, is trying to talk about, and really acknowledge how crucial the work they do is in understanding our history. And the image itself is totally analog. I know no other way. And I am trying to talk about what is within and without the archives. And in the center of the eye, or circle, are images from the archives that are in the archives. The images outside the circle are images that were not in the archives. And in the case of the women on the lower right-hand side, they're aspiring to be in it. They're talking to one another about being in it. And people say, well, who's that old lady on the top? And I said, well, maybe she's me, I'm not sure, but she's somebody looking back and saying, wow, we really didn't have much of a presence. And I'm sorry about that, but you know, it's coming to the fore now as more and more women find their feet on the ground, walking forward in this dimension. I like the use of the puzzle pieces because they are part of my experience of the archives. And I tried to include many representatives of people who are not represented or very underrepresented. I did sneak in the bottom left, my son and his boyfriend, who I don't know if there were any gay men in the archives. I'm not aware if there were. But in the writing in the circle that is giving the boundaries to the piece are words from a great different group of people, artists, novelists, and the Society of Archivists, talking about the importance of the archives and things that particularly moved me about the archives. The latter is pretty obvious. The image within the circle is the realized vision of what the archives itself, the building would look like. The drawing on the watercolor on the upper right corner was done by someone who was active in the archives community, I think in support of the community, and that was the imagined goal that was for the archives. I learned so much. I immediately came home to Costa Mesa, California, and said, I think there's a historical museum here somewhere, and immediately tuned into that, found from the publication that they had made some years ago that there were very few Mexican people of Mexican origin, as well as indigenous people in Costa Mesa. Kind of came as a surprise to me. But according to the archives, or the representation in the archives, there weren't many here. Anyway, this was a marvelous experience for me. I have great gratitude for the opportunity to have participated. And that's pretty much, I think, all I have to say about it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, you've spoken so beautifully to this real problem of absence and presence in the archives, or who is made visible or hyper visible or invisible in those. And I love this kind of the negative space here of this silhouette within these women's profiles. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see, we'll pass the microphone to the virtual microphone as it is to Nancy Bernardo now.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Let me just get my screen up. Oh, actually, no. Okay, so I love talking about process. So this is really exciting to do because it's kind of fun to walk people through what I do. And I also teach at a university, and I really find that to be important in my teaching, is to show my students how I get to a certain place. I teach graphic design, so it's always about kind of like having some sort of deliverable at the end. And like a true designer, I was completely behind getting this done and wished I had, a couple more weeks, because it's just, I always seem to get right close to the deadline. But basically, I first started off speaking with Taylor at the Sheldon Museum at the archives and wanted to know about any of the famous ladies who were in the area or in Middlebury, just ones that might pop out. For her to maybe help me kind of, look more deeply. My idea was that I would focus on trailblazers who help build community. And I was thinking of women who maybe aided in empowering social reform, or maybe suffragettes. A lot of my own work is based on ephemera, and I collect a lot of Victorian imagery. So this kind of felt like it was right in my wheelhouse. And I was just thinking about, just social reform maybe as a topic, and women who were involved in that. A few women were discussed, and as we continued to talk, Taylor mentioned that they had quite a number of these paper silhouettes. And she mentioned that a lot of them, there was no name attached to them. They were just, they were things that families would have. But they were very ephemeral. And so when she said that there was no record of them, or some, not all of them, but some of them didn't have any records, I started thinking, oh my gosh, that resonated with me. And I realized that it wasn't just, the famous people who make the community, but the anonymous people that I was like, why aren't I focusing on them? And I started thinking about, so the unknowns. I felt like they were the ones who aren't recognized, but somehow really keep the community afloat, help really keep the community thrive. And so they become a strong foundation, and a foundation kind of became a theme for me in my head as I was working through this. They put a lot more, I shouldn't say a lot more, but they put sweat equity into making communities thrive. So the Breadloaf Inn became a focal point, and Breadloaf Mountain became a focal point, kept popping up in all of the images I was looking at. And my research felt like that was the center of community that I wanted to maybe speak to. I also started thinking about landscape and also structures and buildings, and how they serve as a backdrop for a community and can really mean a lot to a community, right? Not just the people, but sometimes the things that are within the environment. So when we think of community, we think of, maybe certain buildings, like town halls are always kind of focal points, courthouses, schools, mills, things that just, bring a community together. And I was thinking about Breadloaf Inn as a building that has really survived, or has gone through a lot of different iterations, first as it's been a school, it's been a retreat center, it's a conference center. And it felt just like it was really important for the community. I also just threw this in here because it says the skyscrapers at Middlebury, Vermont, and I love that. I love it. So I just had to put that one in. And then this one too, I came across and I was like, this is so fantastic. Just the future, Middlebury, Vermont in the future. And I love it. I love the futuristic twist on that. So anyway, so I wanted to actually just visually show how community can also intersect with the landscape without becoming a burden to the landscape, and how the two can work together. And this is one of my favorite images that I found of the Breadloaf Mountains. And so I really wanted to work with this because it resonated with some of the work that I had done. I wanted to think about how community is born from the landscape as well. And I wanted the two to visually intersect with each other. One of the last images I actually found when I realized, like, I've got to get cracking on this and stop looking, because I was going down the rabbit hole because I love archives so much, was this image. And then I started putting my collage together, and then I actually looked up geese and what their spirit animal means. And it actually, some of the traits for geese include reliability, productivity, new ideas, joy, guidance, teamwork, quest fulfillment, watchfulness, and wisdom, which I thought was perfect. So I made two different collages. I didn't like this one as much, but I really wanted to play with those silhouettes somehow, but ran out of time. And then this became the final piece that I actually worked with. So again, just building off of showing the workers, the more of the laborers. And it's interesting too, with these images, I found that, there's not many men in them. There are a couple, but I do always, with my work, like to focus more on the female. So I wanted to kind of play with, like, again, this like splitting apart of like the landscape, but also encompassing, and kind of like holding on to the community and the buildings that are important and the people that are important, and then my little flock of geese up at the top. I feel like with this, I just love, again, like I said, I love going through archives. I feel like I've been going through archives kind of all my life, and I think for me it started with archives that my mother had, and it was like photographs. So I would find, boxes of these things and just rifle through them and be like, who is this? Who is this? What is this? Why, why is that here? Why, why are they dressed like that? So it's always really fun for me to use imagery that has, I think all imagery has a history and a past, but it's fun to kind of like, drill down a little bit and find more out about it. And I feel like I really only scratched the surface of what was there at the archive until I had to finally be like, I got to get going. I got to make some work. So, but it was awesome. And it's great to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And I love this kind of meta aspect of you showing some of the labor that went into making your collage about the laborers. Wonderful. So I think now we, last but not least, we're coming to Bernadette, our archivist of the night.
Hello, I'm Bernadette. Thank you so much for having me on this evening. I'm going to share my screen. Of course, it didn't do exactly the way I wanted it to do, but so I'm an archivist at Newcomb Archives and Borhoff Collection, which is at Newcomb Institute, which is on Tulane University's campus in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this is just, I love taking pictures of the archives and things in the archives. So it's really a dream job. So I'm always taking pictures, and I really love like industrial boxes and things like this. So, but anyway, yeah, I have this scrolling thing. I just want to take a minute to acknowledge and pay tribute to the land that I'm speaking from the original inhabitants of the land. The city of New Orleans is a continuation of indigenous trade hub on the Mississippi River, known for thousands of years as Bulbuncha. Native peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and resilient voices of Native Americans remain an inseparable part of our local culture. The Choctaw, Homa, Chitimacha, Biloxi, and other Native peoples have lived on this land. Their identities are inextricably connected to this place. With gratitude and honor, I pay tribute to the original inhabitants. So that being said, I'll go into, so Newcomb Archives is, we pretty much collect the legacy and make available, we collect, preserve, make available records that document the legacy of Newcomb College, which used to be a Victorian industrial art school in New Orleans. And so we have legacy records from that, which is mostly like, you know, the papers of faculty, student records, photographs, and just a lot of things having to do with the history of the college, which makes it like a gold mine for feminist, you know, feminist archives. There's so much stuff. There's female artists. There's, you know, first wave feminists. There's second wave feminists. The second big part of our collection is the papers of second wave feminists who were either Newcomb alumni or who were activists in New Orleans who felt community with Newcomb, whether it was as their alma mater or or for when Newcomb became a women's center. So it has had different roles. It was created in 1887 and it was originally called the H. Sophie Newcomb Memorial College. It was intended as a memorial to Josephine Louise Newcomb's daughter, who died of diphtheria when she was 14. And it was very popular back in that era to, you know, use like a memorial as, or, you know, memorialize a college or spend your money to memorialize somebody. And, you know, so it was intended as an industrial art school. And its first curriculum included classes such as mechanical architectural drawing, as well as design, color ornamentation, wood carving, and then it grew to include pottery, embroidery, jewelry, and book binding. And you might know that of like, you know, it's extremely popular here, the Newcomb pottery. It was produced at Newcomb College and is part of Newcomb Guild. So over the years, things happened like integration, Title IX, which changed, you know, kind of how Newcomb College was. So it merged with the actual arts and sciences of Tulane. And then even further than that, after, you know, it became a women's center, it split its entity and became a women's center. And that's what we have Newcomb Institute today, which is where the archives is. And actually the archives, the Newcomb Archives became an archives in 1988 through a grant. And so it's been around since the 80s when they realized that, oh, we should be, saving the records of this women's college. Tulane University also has some of the records, but we have most of the paper records. But also, there is the Newcomb Art Museum, which has all of the pottery and all of the actual 3D materials that the students made, and we have all the papers and records. And like I said, our archives can be organized really easily into 3 phases that correlate with women's history, that being first, second, third wave feminist materials. We have all 3. However, as far as traditional archives go, we don't have a lot of records, so to say, in papers of third wave feminists, mainly because they're not old enough yet, or they may not feel that Newcomb College is their part of their community. It's kind of changed like the culture between undergraduate students and, higher, where people get their master's degrees. But, we hope that in the future, more intersectional and more like third wave feminists or fourth wave, whatever it ends up being, feel community with Newcomb archives. And yeah, and I'm forgetting to scroll, but yeah, so we have zines. We have a large collection of zines, which is part of our third world feminist section. We started collecting tarot cards. And also, since I like to take photos of all the archives when I'm processing, I don't know, there's just something about like the way paper just kind of piles up. I'm really attracted to how those patterns, so I'm always taking photos of it. And I just really love the way things look when they're being processed. And here's even more stuff where I love processing things and looking through stuff. And I too, my mom had photographs and she had her own files. And I'd often have to do the thing of like this kind of yearly helping her like weed through and reorganize. And it's obvious that I would become an archivist. But my first thing was, I wanted to be an artist. So I'm running out of time, but yeah, we have initiatives to create a DIY feminism, so archives as a commons for creative activism. So we have like a lot of initiatives, especially since we can now be in person, and the pandemic is not keeping us at home. And then I also wanted to brush on, artists who have actually utilized our collections. So this really giant installation was created by an art collective from LA called Fallen Fruit. And they created this thing called Empire. And so they used they used a bust of Josephine Louise Newcomb and her daughter. They used this actual mirror from when Newcomb College, the students during like gym or swimming would change or check their posture in front of this mirror. And then we also have Josephine Louise Newcomb's collection of souvenir and gift books. So that was a really interesting thing. And then another artist in town that is really interesting who uses our archives, maybe not for collage, but in their pottery is Rachel DePaul. And she specifically, points to and, is inspired by Newcomb pottery. And then also I did want to be an artist and I did go to art school and I always focused on installation and sculpture in my personal work. And I always loved trash. And so, my senior project as a sculptor, I made a giant installation of trash monsters. And so now today I make collages sometimes, and I love finding like old weird papers and just making compositions with them and just using them as like a thinking puzzle piece kind of thing and just trying to balance things out. But I just really love balancing chaos and, making things work and fit together. And then down here are 2 collages that I made with actual discarded papers from weeding from collections that I process. And so, yeah. And this one is kind of a love letter to paper. I really love the edges of paper and I just really love seeing it in the archives. And then this one is just, it's pretty much the thrown away bits and pieces from the Kit Center collection that I just recently processed. And she was an eco-feminist. And that's it. And I have some resources here and I will share this link in the chat. And if you want to link to any of this, you can. Thank you.
Bernadette, thank you so much. This is remarkable. I love the materiality of the paper that we can really get a sense of in that. And I think I saw was it a print maybe of a giant paper clip?
Oh yes, I'm like really obsessed with the plastic clips, and like I try to make sure I like put plastic clip like art everywhere. Like I just made pouches with that stamps for everybody for Christmas.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, this idea or the thing that connects that is sometimes kind of unseen because and yet it is so crucial for holding things together, or it evokes so many of the themes I think some of you have alluded to this evening about visibility or invisibility or labor and utility in some ways. So thank you so much to all of you. I wanted to let our audience know that you can also submit questions. I don't think you have an ability to unmute yourself, but there is a Q&A box in along the bottom of your screen. So please do type in some questions for our panelists there, and we'll be excited to see them. It looks like Bernadette has just shared her link with those of us who are in the, let's see, I'll see if I can send it to all participants. I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm going to put Bernadette's link in the chat here. And Penny, let's see, Penny asks, is any of the archive available online? I think that's a question for Bernadette, although maybe it's also about the Sheldon Museum, in which case I can speak to that.
Yes, if you follow the link, we have about 11 collections on our Newcomb digital repository, and then we do have, I think, 4 collections in the Tulane University Digital Library, and those links should be in the actual link that I shared.
Great, and I put the link into the Q&A answer section of things, so thank you so much, Bernadette. Taylor Rostini, who many of you already worked with, writes in and says, thank you all for your thoughtful reflections. I'm not sure if the audience realizes that this whole artist residency unfolded completely virtually. I'm wondering if any of the artists would like to reflect on their experience of making art in response to a place they only experienced through digital images. So I'll give our panelists a moment to think about that. And this also is a good opportunity for me to reiterate my thanks to Taylor and Eva in this Herculean labor of corresponding with all of the artists who worked with the project and kind of asking the good archivist research questions to help people think through what kind of themes or topics or materials they might find inspiration from in the archive. And then in addition to the labor of the scanning and the kind of organization of that. So do any of our panelists want to speak to Taylor's? Yes, I see Nancy is eagerly raising her hand.
Yeah, you know, it's great that we've been able to do things online. I think Zoom has been great for that. When maybe travel or being together hasn't been so great. But I miss having, like, when you're doing a residency, you know, the idea is like you're doing it with other people live, right? So I missed having that fluidness, I think, and also not being in the space or actually visiting the area, which I think could have shifted some of the way my work went too. You know, it would have been nice to kind of just immerse yourself in it. So hopefully there'll be something in the future, and then I'll apply, and hopefully I can come up, or I'll just come up and immerse myself in the archive. So for me, I think it works, but I love the idea of actually being in person and in community with other people to like bounce ideas off of and talk to them about things, and the archivists too, talking to them about, you know, things that they might not think of right away, because we had a meeting, and then, you know, each of us, Taylor had to go do her things, I, you know, was doing my things. So it's, you don't, maybe if things popped up, you weren't thinking of it, you know, to talk about it.
Yeah, Nancy, we've got to get you to tour Breadloaf. Were there other respondents who wanted to speak to that point as well?
I thought there was, a remarkable sense of community online. So even though we weren't in person, it was like this short, intense experience of getting to know people and making nerdy art friends who all like history stuff. So, and it was
Yeah,
great.
I was actually surprised how well that worked too. Communicating with people over Slack and stuff. I mean, it was better than I expected in terms of forming a little mini community. But I do wish I could go to Vermont.
Yeah, let's see. Can we unmute Vicki again?
I'm in agreement with the others. And one of the things that was most exciting for me being on Slack, besides just meeting these other wonderful artists, but people shared their process, or some people shared their process. And I loved seeing what their process was. And I thought it was very useful. And I felt people were helpful. I certainly felt a real sense of community while we were there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a couple more questions about this question of process. Alice Stanton-Hagan says, thank you all for sharing your wonderful work. How did the collage artists select archival materials? Did they request materials based on finding aids, or did archivists prepare digitized material first? So if some of you could speak to the process part. Yeah, Vicki.
I looked, I saw things, I included things that I saw, but I also interviewed the archivists and asked them each if they had a favorite piece, if they had to name a favorite piece, what was their favorite piece? They both had very meaningful, personally meaningful comments, and I included them in the piece, and I enjoyed being able to do so.
Vicki, that was a very good question to ask.
Fantastic. Tanya Dawkins asks, I'd love to hear from the speakers about any experiences they have with creating group or community collage as a collective public art making. And yeah, I think this is really evoking again that sense of togetherness and creative community that one has in a traditional artist residency versus this kind of COVID enforced remote art practice.
I can speak to that. So before the pandemic, we had just moved into a new space, which includes that gigantic reading room you saw in one of my pictures. And we moved in there, and then the pandemic happened, and then we were not able to do anything with it. So now that we're able to be in person, I mentioned the DIY feminism, using archives as a commons for creative activism. So, the archives is attached to an institute that focuses on feminist theory and gender and sexuality studies. So we have a lot of students and a lot of people, but we're trying to open it up to getting people into the archives to use as a creative commons, like a place to collaborate. We do crafternoons where I put out collage materials, and we want to have more kind of feminist DIY artists who come and speak. We're also doing we're trying to also do more classes, teach more classes on using our archives to teach DIY feminism. And, a lot of that is, a lot of zine making, a lot of DIY feminism is, using clip art, is using, anything you can find. And sometimes, it was archival material, maybe not destroying it, but copying it, photocopying it. And then also we're trying to find partners and collaborators locally, and even, in conferences nationally, who will let us do kind of crafternoon sessions so we can get people talking and creating.
I would also say, yeah, I feel like there's a lot more collage collectives kind of popping up in cities all around. And I mean, Collage Magazine is awesome, right? So there's always I feel like that's such a great resource to find other things that are happening, other collage groups or opportunities. I definitely during COVID, like in the height of it, I was part of a group of like a co-working group, and we would meet in the mornings from like 9 to 10 and just be on Zoom. And it got to a point where there was like almost 100 of us on it. And it was incredible, like loved it, because you're so isolated. And everyone, we weren't all collage artists, but it was mostly artists. So writers, musicians, collagists, painters, all of that thing. Everybody's working in their studios. So that was really cool. And I think those are beneficial as well. And I think fairly easy to start. I just feel like people really do want to, do things. So, I think you could just like start your own or look to Collage magazine and see if there are things in there to, find more resources. But it's really fun to see more of collage in, being more mainstream, really.
Absolutely. And Nancy, you're talking about Collage magazine? That's KOLAJ, right?
KOLAJ, yes.
Terrific. So I know that our panelists are intimately familiar with the Collage Institute, but I wasn't sure if all of our audience members would know to look for that amazing resource. Also, the brainchild, I think, of Rick Cassini-Cador and amazing collaborators and co-conspirators.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's see. One audience member, Sharon Ostro writes, I belong to Philadelphia Collage Works, and we have created several opportunities to make art with the community. We are always looking for more opportunities. So a similar kind of group community participatory practice. Another attendee asks, since this was a virtual residency and we've been talking about working with scans, for those of you who worked in analog, how were the images obtained? So did you print those out? How did this all work? I know that Vicki worked that way, and maybe others of you also did. I think xtine talked about making cyanotypes too. So.
Well, I just wanted to chime in and say that we were provided with some very high resolution scans. So that was great. And I know a lot of us printed out our materials. So I did. Cutting is something that I have to do. There's no way I can get around. That's just part of my process. So I had to print and cut. But my process is also photographic, so other people can speak to the differences. But yeah, so that was an interesting challenge to sort of work around. I think what xtine was talking about before, that sort of tactile nature of the paper, and sort of trying to bring that through, even though we didn't really have it before us.
Yeah, I used some analog materials, and the cyanotypes were just contact prints with the begonias and the pansies, and they did not come from the archive. They came from the archive of my garden. So, I worked into my collage some pieces that really were from today. But maybe Vicki can speak a little bit more about working with some analog materials that stemmed from the archive.
I really find it interesting and a bit confusing what is totally digital, what is analog, and I think that's been spoken to at least, if not here, many places. So when I reproduced a scanned image and then cut the scanned image, should I have said that's kind of digital? I guess so, but it doesn't feel digital to me because I'm still cutting, and I really don't know if there is a technical, and Nancy's bobbing her head, so she might know, and I'd love to hear what she has to say.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, Vicki. I feel like I work in both. So the project I did, and I realized I wasn't part of the residency for this community. I was working on my own too, so that definitely changes the whole thing. But anyway, I work totally digitally this time around, but I usually like to work analog. But I think, yeah, if you're still printing out something that's digital, but pasting it or taping it or however you're adhering it I still think that's analog.
Well, I appreciate having another voice that feels that way. I thank you for that.
Sure.
I think this also maybe raises the question too about archives and born digital archives, and maybe some of the challenges that Bernadette was evoking in this question about collecting the archives of third wave or fourth wave feminists, or kind of how do we collect what's happening today? Will we have kind of people's Twitter feeds and Instagrams and things like that? How is this media working, or how do we preserve what feels so ephemeral in some ways? I was thinking too about that connection when you were bringing up scissors and the tactility. I was thinking a little bit back to that connection between collage and textile work, and some of the kind of conceptual linkages between the materiality and processes of collage and something like quilt making or other textile work. And of course, some of the early, not of course, but, and also some of the earliest computer works being related to the kind of programming done for looms and weaving. So I was wondering if some of you might speak to the intersections either in your own practice or your own thinking about textiles and paper collage. Not everybody all at once.
Well, I'm not really a purist when it comes to making collages or things. Like there might be a piece of fabric somewhere on some of my collages. If it fits the puzzle piece, then I'll use it.
I like to sew on paper, and I like to use fabric and treat the fabric like paper. So in a recent show, I was called a textile artist, and I was like, well, really, I'm a collage artist. I just happen to be working with fabric right now. So.
Fantastic. I think I saw on your Instagram an embroidered receipt, shopping receipt.
Yeah. So it's like a cyanotype print, but it's solar fast dye. So I didn't do any of the embroidery. So that's a whole series. I've printed Your Cashier Today Was Self, Your Gas Station Attendant Today Was Self, and then there are more to come if you have a job that so these are all about shadow work. Shadow work is work that you do that someone else used to get paid for. And so I'm appropriating these textiles that represent women's invisible labor. So someone else did them, and their relatives who've gotten them donate them, and they don't care about them, and then I buy them for cheap and destroy them by putting fresh words on them. And lots of people work with vintage linens and like stitch on them, but I have no patience at all for hand stitching. So then when I got into the dye work and doing the resists, I was like, yay, I can finally put words on these things because I like words and text. And previously I'd been printing vintage doilies on vintage hankies and sometimes also plants, but now I'm doing now it's a series of words and all about labor.
Terrific. And bringing up the kind of text and textile
Yes.
engines as well.
Yep.
Terrific. I couldn't tell if there were other people who were also ready to pipe up about textile or practice. I realize it's also getting kind of late in the day. An anonymous attendee asks, when will the next residency take place? And I know that I'm pretty sure Rick Cassini-Cador is in the house metaphorically in the participant audience, but I did a quick Google and you too can go to KOLAJ Institute online. Let's see, kolajinstitute.org, and that's again KOLAJ. And it tells me that there will be a virtual forum online Saturday, December 22nd. And all other kinds of artist calls, virtual and in-person residencies are available on that site. So Rick continues to be a powerhouse of gathering collage and creative artists from around the world together.
And I also, yeah, Collage Fest is in June of 2023, and I went to the last one. It was awesome. And, you know, I love the idea of having a conference where you can like collage throughout the conference. And I met so many cool people. So, and that's going to be in New Orleans, I believe. So
Amazing.
I'll be there.
Yeah, and I just finished up a residency, leading a residency online virtual one for The Awakening, Kate Chopin's The Awakening, and we did collages for it to go along with it. So now I will be laying it out. I've started like the laying out process of it. But yeah, and they did another one before this one, another book one. It was Money, Money, Oh Money, Money. So there's like a lot of stuff happening for sure.
Absolutely. This is really wonderful. Thank you so much. I realized also that I assumed that the audience member was asking about accessing archives online with Bernadette's materials, but just in case they were asking about the Stewart-Swift Research Center at the Sheldon Museum, you can go to henrysheldonmuseum.org, and there's a drop-down menu for archive. Not all of our finding aids are online, although some are. Not all of our collections have finding aids yet, because we have a very small, heroic, and mighty staff, and yet so many materials that have not quite yet been completely organized in all of the archival practices. But Eva Garcelon-Hart, our archivist, again, is a total whiz and has amazing institutional memory and kind of mastery of the collection. So she would be the person to contact about that. And her contact information, again, is on the Henry Sheldon Museum website. And I also wanted to thank, let's see, making sure I'm not, oh, good. The Cassini House has put an announcement of upcoming residencies and projects with the Collage magazine site. So I'm hopeful that everyone in the audience can also see that question. Or not so much question as answer and link in the chat. Thank you so much to all of our lovely, wonderful, brilliant panelists. I'm so grateful for you sharing a little window into your practice. I also wanted to thank the Walter Cerf Community Foundation for sponsoring tonight's event. Of course, to Rick Cassini-Cador and the Collage Institute for all that they've done. Eva Garcelon-Hart and Taylor Rossini, formerly of the Henry Sheldon Museum. And a quick reminder that we will have another event related to the Artists in the Archives exhibition about collage and place as archive that will be on January 11th. Another online webinar. So check out henrysheldonmuseum.org on the upcoming events to stay tuned or to tune into that. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us tonight, and happy collaging.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.